Maria Garcia had always believed that truth had a price, but she never imagined that it would cost her everything. It started with a simple investigation, a story meant to expose the small cracks in her town's facade. But when she uncovered something far more sinister, she became the target of powerful forces determined to bury the truth, and her with it. Now, handcuffed in the back of a police car, with her son waiting for her at home, Maria realizes that her life has spiraled into a nightmare. How did it come to this? Who could she trust? And most importantly, will she survive long enough to expose the dark secrets threatening to tear her world apart? Maria Garcia had always believed that uncovering the truth was her life's calling. As a dedicated investigative journalist in the small town of Willow Creek, she had built a reputation for exposing corruption and fighting for justice. But nothing could prepare her for the day she stumbled upon a dark secret that would not only shake the foundations of her community, but also put her and her loved ones in grave danger. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Maria received an anonymous tip about suspicious activities happening at the old Miller warehouse on the outskirts of town. Her instincts kicked in, igniting a spark of curiosity and determination. She had covered the town's history of corruption before, under-the-table deals and unreported scandals. But this felt different. There was a weight in the air, an ominous sense that something was very wrong. With her notebook and camera in hand, she drove through the muddy back roads, the rain hammering against her windshield like the frantic beating of her heart. As she approached the warehouse, the sight that greeted her sent chills down her spine. The once vibrant structure stood desolate and crumbling, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring into the void. But it was the flickering lights inside that caught her attention. Was someone really there? As she crept closer, the sounds of muffled voices reached her ears, laced with urgency. Maria pressed herself against the cold, damp wall, her heart racing as she strained to listen. What she heard next sent a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. A discussion about large shipments of illegal goods being trafficked right under the noses of the local authorities. Names were mentioned, and as she scribbled furiously in her notebook, her mind raced. Could this be the break she had been waiting for? But just as she was about to step back and find a better vantage point, the door swung open, and two burly men emerged, their faces shadowed under the brim of their hats. They glanced around, and Maria felt a jolt of panic. She was exposed, a mere witness to something far beyond her understanding. The men exchanged hushed words, their expressions shifting from casual to alarmed as they scanned the area. In a heartbeat, Maria ducked behind a nearby dumpster, her pulse pounding in her ears. She was a journalist, not a criminal, but this felt like the moment that would define her career. Peeking out, she saw one of the men reach into his pocket and pull out a small metallic object, something that glinted ominously in the dim light. Fear clutched at her throat, but she couldn't turn back now. The potential story was monumental, and she was determined to capture it. As the men stepped back inside the warehouse, Maria's fingers flew over her camera, capturing images that could potentially expose the underbelly of Willow Creek. The truth was out there, waiting for her to unravel it. She knew the risks. She had covered dangerous stories before, but this felt different, more perilous, more real. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from within the warehouse, followed by shouting. Maria's heart sank. Whatever was happening inside was escalating, and she couldn't just stand there. Gripping her camera tightly, she edged closer to the entrance, trying to catch snippets of the chaos unfolding. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, but her desire for justice overpowered her fear. Peering through a crack in the door, she caught sight of a confrontation between the two men and a third figure, a woman whose face was contorted in anger. "You think you can just keep doing this? This is our town," she yelled, her voice piercing through the air. Maria felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this woman was an ally. But the men laughed mockingly, dismissing her concerns. The atmosphere thickened, tension crackling like electricity. Maria's heart raced as she instinctively raised her camera, capturing the moment. The last shot before she felt a hand grip her shoulder from behind. Startled, she spun around to find herself face to face with an old friend, Javier, a local cop who had once trusted her with his secrets. His eyes widened in surprise and concern. "Maria, what are you doing here?" he whispered urgently. She explained in hushed tones, revealing the tip-off and what she had witnessed. Javier's face darkened as he glanced back at the warehouse. "This is dangerous. You need to leave now. I'll handle it." But Maria shook her head, a fire igniting within her. "No, Javier. If we don't act, they'll keep getting away with this. We need to expose them." Javier hesitated, torn between his duty as a cop and his loyalty to Maria. But he knew better than anyone that the truth could be a double-edged sword. It could bring justice, but it could also put them in the crosshairs of powerful enemies. As they stood there, the sound of more footsteps approached the warehouse. Panic surged through Maria. "We don't have time. We have to gather evidence now." Javier nodded reluctantly, knowing he couldn't let her face this alone. Together, they crept closer to the building, hearts pounding in sync with the urgency of the moment. Little did they know, they were not just uncovering a story. They were stepping into a deadly game where the stakes were life and death. As they entered the shadows of the warehouse, the first taste of danger loomed ahead, setting the stage for a confrontation that would change their lives forever. The discovery had just begun, but the threat that awaited them was already casting its long, dark shadow. The inside of the warehouse was a world apart from the damp, dreary exterior. Flickering fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over stacks of crates and boxes, their contents hidden in shadow. Maria and Javier moved cautiously, their senses heightened, aware that they were stepping into a realm where every sound could draw unwanted attention. Maria's heart raced as they navigated the cluttered space, her instincts screaming that they were in over their heads. She couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching them, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment to pounce. She turned to Javier, who was scanning the area with a look of grim determination etched across his face. "We need to find something concrete," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the fluorescent lights. Just then, the sound of muffled voices echoed through the warehouse, pulling their attention toward a dimly lit corner. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the men from before, the ones discussing illegal shipments. They were standing near a large crate, their faces animated, their gestures wild. Maria motioned for Javier to follow her as they crouched behind a stack of boxes, hearts pounding in sync with the fear surging through them. "Listen to this," one of the men said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "If we don't get the shipment out tonight, we're in serious trouble. The cops are sniffing around. We can't let them find out what we're doing." Javier's eyes widened, and Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The implications were clear. They were on borrowed time. She fumbled for her camera, eager to document the evidence, but just as she lifted it to capture the moment, a loud crash rang out from behind them. They both turned sharply to find another man entering the warehouse, his face obscured by the darkness. He spoke with authority, his voice booming, sending shivers down Maria's spine. "What the hell is going on here? We don't have time for screw-ups." The tension in the room escalated, and Maria felt her pulse quicken. Who was this new player? The threat was palpable, and she sensed that they were now in the eye of a storm they couldn't control. Javier motioned for her to keep quiet, his eyes darting around, searching for an escape route. In that moment, the man's gaze landed on the crate. "Get it open! We need to make sure everything is in order before the truck arrives." As the men hurriedly began prying the crate open, Maria and Javier exchanged a panicked glance. They had to act fast. Maria's heart raced with urgency as she whispered, "We need to get that footage. If we can capture them in the act, it will be undeniable evidence." Javier nodded, determination shining in his eyes. But just as they prepared to move, the man turned suddenly, catching a glimpse of movement. "Who's there?" he barked, his voice slicing through the tension like a knife. Maria's instincts kicked in. She grabbed Javier's arm and pulled him deeper into the shadows, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The sound of footsteps echoed closer, and she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They were being hunted, and the thrill of the chase ignited a fire within her. The men were closing in, their voices rising in frustration as they searched for the source of the disturbance. Maria and Javier ducked behind another stack of crates, their breaths shallow, hearts pounding. Maria's mind raced with possibilities. They couldn't get caught. Not now. not when they were so close to uncovering the truth. Suddenly, Maria's phone vibrated in her pocket, a blaring reminder of the outside world. She cursed under her breath, quickly silencing it. But it was too late. The men had heard the sound, and their attention turned back to the shadows. "We're not alone," one of them said, his voice laced with menace. "Find them!" Panic surged through Maria. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. In a desperate attempt to buy time, she whispered to Javier, "We have to create a distraction. If we can lure them away, we might have a chance to escape." Javier nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What do you have in mind?" As the men began searching their hiding place, Maria scanned the room, her eyes landing on a stack of old pallets. An idea sparked. "We could knock those over. It'll create enough noise to draw their attention." Without waiting for a response, Maria crept toward the pallets, her heart pounding in her chest. With a swift kick, she sent them tumbling to the ground, the clatter echoing through the warehouse. The men turned, shouting in frustration as they rushed toward the sound. "Go!" Maria hissed, urging Javier to follow her lead. They slipped out from behind the crates and darted toward a side exit, but not before glancing back to see the men frantically moving toward the noise, their backs turned to them. Just as they reached the door, Maria paused. She couldn't leave without some proof. "Wait, I need to get a picture," she whispered urgently. Javier glanced back at the approaching figures, worry etched on his face. "We don't have time, Maria." "I know, but if we don't document this, everything we risked will be for nothing." With a determined nod, she lifted her camera, snapping a few quick shots of the chaotic scene. The flash illuminated the darkness momentarily, and she felt a surge of exhilaration. This was the truth, raw and undeniable. But as she snapped the last picture, she felt the weight of the moment shift. The men turned back, eyes narrowing as they caught sight of her. "There!" one of them yelled, and the adrenaline surged anew in Maria's veins. "Run!" Javier shouted, and they bolted through the door just as the men charged after them, their angry shouts echoing in the cavernous space. Outside, the rain had intensified, the drops pelting down like bullets. Maria and Javier sprinted toward the nearest cover, ducking behind a row of abandoned vehicles. The world felt like it was closing in on them, the danger lurking just behind the veil of darkness. Breathless, they crouched low, hearts racing. "What do we do now?" Javier gasped, glancing around for any signs of their pursuers. "We can't go to the police. They're involved somehow," Maria said, fear tightening her chest. "But we need to get this information out there. If we can find a way to leak it to the press or the public." Before she could finish her thought, a shout from the warehouse pierced the night. "They went this way. Don't let them escape." Maria's heart dropped. They were already closing in. Time was slipping away, and with it the fragile thread of hope that they could expose the corruption suffocating Willow Creek. In that moment of desperation, Maria realized she needed a new plan, a bold move that could turn the tide. "We need to confront them head on," she said, a fierce determination igniting within her. "What do you mean? Are you crazy?" Javier exclaimed, eyes wide with disbelief. "No, listen. If we can corner them and get them to confess on camera, it will be undeniable proof. It's risky, but it's our only shot." The gravity of her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Javier hesitated. But Maria's fire sparked something within him. "All right, let's do it. But we need to be smart about this." They set off again, moving cautiously through the shadows. Every rustle of leaves and distant sounds sent a jolt of fear through them, but they pressed on, united in purpose. The thrill of danger hung in the air, and Maria felt alive, driven by the promise of uncovering the truth. As they approached the entrance again, the adrenaline pulsing through her veins, Maria knew they were stepping into the storm. The threat loomed larger than ever, but she felt ready. Together, they would face whatever came next, armed with courage and the undeniable power of truth. As Maria and Javier approached the warehouse once again, the tension was palpable. The adrenaline coursed through their veins, amplifying every sound: the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, and the faint echoes of voices from inside. This time, they were not mere witnesses. They were players in a high-stakes game, determined to turn the tide against the corrupt forces that had plagued Willow Creek for far too long. "Stay close," Maria whispered, her voice steady despite the fear swirling within her. She tightened her grip on the camera, the weight of it feeling like both a burden and a lifeline. It was time to confront the men who had been wreaking havoc on their community, and she was ready to expose them. As they crept around the perimeter, they could see the men from earlier still gathered around the crate, their voices rising in urgency. It was clear they were panicking, their earlier bravado diminished in the face of potential exposure. Maria and Javier exchanged a determined glance, the resolve in their eyes affirming that they were in this together, come what may. Suddenly, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder and more menacing. Maria's heart raced. This was their chance. "They're coming," she hissed, a mixture of excitement and fear igniting her words. "We have to make this count." Javier nodded, his expression serious. "Let's get in there before they figure out what's happening." They slipped through the door, keeping to the shadows as they maneuvered past the scattered crates and equipment. The chaos inside was palpable, men shouting at one another, their frustration evident. Maria's fingers tingled with anticipation as she raised her camera, ready to capture the unfolding drama. Just as they positioned themselves for the perfect shot, one of the men turned, his eyes locking onto them. "Hey, who the hell are you?" he shouted, his face twisting with rage. In that instant, everything erupted. The men charged toward them, their intent clear. Maria felt a surge of panic, but there was no turning back. "Get the footage!" she shouted to Javier, who instinctively raised his own phone to capture the moment. "Run!" he yelled, sprinting toward a nearby stack of crates. Maria followed, adrenaline fueling her every step. The world around them blurred into a cacophony of shouting and crashing sounds as they ducked and weaved through the chaos. They could hear the men behind them, their footsteps thundering closer, urgency filling the air. Maria could feel her heart pounding in sync with the frantic pace of their escape. Just when it seemed like they might slip away, a heavy hand landed on her shoulder, yanking her back. "Got you!" the man snarled, his grip unyielding. With a surge of strength, Maria twisted free, but not before she saw Javier being caught by another thug, his phone clattering to the ground as he struggled. "No!" she shouted, the fear slicing through her like a knife. Before she could act, the door swung open, and uniformed officers stormed in, their badges gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Freeze! Police!" they yelled, their voices cutting through the chaos like a siren. Maria's heart leaped with hope, but it quickly turned to confusion as the men turned their aggression toward the officers. "You don't know what you're doing," one of them shouted, desperation lacing his voice. "This is our territory." The scene erupted into chaos, fists flying and bodies colliding as the officers attempted to restrain the aggressive men. Maria's breath hitched in her throat. This was it, the moment they had fought so hard to reach, but it was more chaotic than she had ever imagined. "Get back!" an officer yelled, pushing her and Javier behind him for safety. Maria felt a mixture of gratitude and frustration. She needed to capture the truth, to document everything, but the danger was escalating. Through the melee, Maria caught sight of Javier struggling against the officer holding him. "I have footage," he shouted, desperation spilling from his voice. "We have evidence against them." "Just stay calm," the officer replied, but the chaos was unrelenting. Maria could feel the tension crackling in the air, every heartbeat echoing her urgency. She managed to maneuver to a clearer spot, her camera ready, but the fight was moving fast. With a final surge of adrenaline, the officers managed to subdue the remaining men, handcuffing them as they yelled and struggled. Maria's heart raced as she captured every moment, her camera a testament to the truth unfolding before her. Finally, one of the officers turned to Maria and Javier, his expression softening as he realized who they were. "Are you two all right? We heard reports of suspicious activity." "Yes, we have evidence," Maria said, her voice urgent as she held out her camera. "These men were planning something illegal, and we've been following them for weeks." The officer took a moment to process her words, glancing at the chaos around them. "Let's get you both to safety. Then we can look at your footage. We need to document everything." As they were led outside, the rain had eased, but the weight of what they had just experienced hung heavily in the air. Maria felt a mixture of relief and disbelief wash over her. They had faced danger, witnessed corruption, and somehow they were still standing. But as they were led away from the scene, Maria caught a glimpse of the men being loaded into police cars. Their eyes were filled with rage, and a chill ran down her spine. This wasn't over. The threat still loomed large over Willow Creek, and the battle was far from won. "Are you okay?" Javier asked, concern etched on his face as they found themselves standing apart from the chaos. "I will be," Maria replied, forcing a smile despite the turmoil within. "But we have to make sure this doesn't end here. We need to ensure they don't find a way to weasel out of this." Javier nodded, his expression resolute. "We will. We've come this far. We can't stop now." With the rain slowly clearing, they made their way to the police vehicle. The officers were busy gathering information, but Maria felt the weight of the moment pressing in on her. This was her chance to make a real difference, to finally uncover the truth that had eluded them for so long. As they sat in the back of the police car, Maria couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. It had started as a simple curiosity, a desire to expose the truth about the corruption in their town, but it had transformed into something so much bigger. Now, they were at the center of a whirlwind that could change everything. The officer turned to them, clipboard in hand. "Can you tell me exactly what happened tonight?" Maria took a deep breath, steadying her nerves as she began to recount their story, detailing every moment of fear and courage that had led them to this point. She could feel the weight of their evidence, a truth that needed to be heard. As she spoke, she glanced at Javier, his eyes reflecting the same determination she felt within her. They were no longer just witnesses. They were warriors in a battle against the darkness that threatened their home. And as the words poured out, Maria knew they were on the brink of something monumental. The arrest had been just the beginning. They had to keep pushing, keep fighting, because Willow Creek deserved to be free from the shadows that had cast a pall over its future. Together, they would shine a light on the truth, no matter the cost. The days following the arrest felt like a whirlwind for Maria and Javier. What had started as a simple investigation had morphed into a full-scale battle for justice, and they were right in the thick of it. As news of the arrest spread through Willow Creek, the community began to stir, fueled by a mix of fear and determination. Maria could sense the palpable tension. The town was on the brink of awakening, and they were about to be the catalysts for that change. It was a chilly morning when Maria received a call from Officer Harris, the lead investigator on the case. "Maria, can you come down to the station? We need to discuss the next steps," he said, his voice serious yet encouraging. Maria felt a jolt of anxiety mixed with anticipation. This was it, the moment they would determine how to confront the men they had exposed. Javier met her outside the station, his face a mask of concern. "What do you think they want?" he asked, trying to gauge her mood. "I'm not sure, but we're about to find out," Maria replied, her heart pounding. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, but she also felt the flicker of hope igniting within. As they entered the station, they were greeted by Officer Harris, who ushered them into a small conference room. The walls were plastered with posters about community safety and crime prevention, but all Maria could focus on was the task at hand. "Thank you for coming," he said, taking a seat across from them. "We've gathered enough evidence to take this case further, but we need your help." Maria leaned in, intrigued. "What do you need from us?" "We want you to gather testimonies from other victims. There are many people in this town who have suffered under the weight of corruption, but they're afraid to speak up," he explained. "If we can compile their stories, we can build a stronger case against these men." Javier's eyes widened. "You mean we'll be the ones reaching out to them?" "Exactly," Officer Harris affirmed. "You both have a unique connection to this community. You're already trusted figures, and people are more likely to open up to you." Maria felt a surge of purpose wash over her. "We'll do it," she declared, determination resonating in her voice. They left the station, hearts racing with a renewed sense of mission. Over the next few days, Maria and Javier set out on a quest to connect with the community. They visited local businesses, held informal meetings at the community center, and even organized a small gathering at the park. Each encounter was a mixture of hope and trepidation. They were not just seeking stories, but also unearthing the raw wounds of a town that had been silenced for far too long. At first, many were hesitant to speak. "What if they come after me?" one woman whispered, fear etched in her features. Another man shook his head, saying, "They have powerful connections. It's not worth the risk." Maria could feel the weight of their fear, the thick air of distrust that hung over them, but she refused to back down. "Change doesn't come without a fight," she urged. "You all deserve to be heard. We can't let fear dictate our lives any longer." Her words, filled with passion, began to ignite a spark within those gathered. Slowly, people began to share their stories, tales of intimidation, of lost opportunities, of lives disrupted by the very men who should have been protectors of the community. One elderly woman spoke of her small grocery store that had been threatened when she refused to pay protection money. "I was scared," she admitted, tears welling in her eyes, "but I didn't want to give in. This is my home." Her bravery resonated with others, and soon more voices joined in, creating a chorus of pain and resilience. As they collected these testimonies, Maria and Javier also documented everything, recording the stories on video, ensuring that every voice was preserved for future generations. With each story shared, they felt the community's strength beginning to coalesce, a rising tide of collective courage that refused to be silenced any longer. Yet, even as they rallied the community, shadows of fear loomed larger. Maria received an anonymous message one night, a simple text that sent chills down her spine. "You're making a mistake. Leave it alone." The threat was unspoken, yet clear. As she shared the message with Javier, they both knew the risks were escalating. "What if they try to silence us?" Javier asked, a flicker of doubt in his voice. "We can't stop now," Maria insisted, her voice firm. "We've come too far. This is bigger than us." But deep down, she felt the uncertainty clawing at her resolve. They were up against powerful men, and they had already shown their willingness to use intimidation. The stakes were higher than ever, and the danger felt omnipresent. In the following weeks, they continued their work, connecting with more victims, compiling their stories, and building a robust case. Officer Harris frequently updated them on the legal proceedings, which were beginning to gain momentum. "We're going to need you both in court," he explained during one of their meetings. "Your testimonies will be vital to the prosecution." As the court date approached, Maria's anxiety grew. She spent sleepless nights replaying their encounters, hoping that their courage would be enough to withstand the onslaught of the defense. The community stood behind them, but would it be enough to pierce the veil of corruption that had long held sway? Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courtroom buzzed with tension as people filled the seats, and Maria felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. She and Javier took their seats at the front, surrounded by other witnesses who had come forward to stand against the men who had wronged them. When the trial began, the prosecution presented the evidence, detailing the corruption and intimidation faced by the town. Maria felt a surge of adrenaline as she listened to the testimonies of her neighbors, each story a thread weaving together a tapestry of injustice. Then it was her turn. As she stood to testify, her heart raced. She looked out at the jury, at the faces of those who would determine the fate of her community. "I want to share what I witnessed," she began, her voice steady despite the fear swirling within her. "I want to talk about the impact these men have had on our lives." As she spoke, recounting the stories they had gathered, she could feel the weight of their pain in her words. With every sentence, she painted a vivid picture of a town struggling against the darkness, the flicker of hope igniting in the eyes of her fellow witnesses. She could see the jury shifting, their expressions reflecting the gravity of her testimony. When she finished, she felt a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over her. She had shared the truth, but now it was out of her hands. As the defense took its turn, Maria watched the men who had terrorized their community attempt to manipulate the narrative. They dismissed the victims as unreliable, claiming that their testimonies were nothing more than fabrications born from a desire for revenge. But Maria felt the strength of the community behind her, a unified front that refused to crumble in the face of intimidation. They were not just victims, they were warriors, ready to fight for their truth. As the trial continued, Maria and Javier remained on edge, knowing that their fight was far from over. They had dared to speak out, to shine a light on the darkness, but they also understood the risks of their actions. As days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted, but they held firm, each testimony further intertwining their fates with the future of Willow Creek. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom held its breath as the foreman stood to announce the decision. "We find the defendants guilty on all counts," he declared, the words ringing through the room like a bell of liberation. Maria felt tears spring to her eyes as the reality of the moment washed over her. The battle had been fought, and they had emerged victorious. The community erupted in cheers, a wave of emotion cascading through the crowd. People hugged, cried, and celebrated the dawn of a new chapter for Willow Creek. But amidst the joy, Maria couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She understood that this was just the beginning. The road to justice was often long and fraught with challenges, and the corrupt forces they had fought against wouldn't vanish overnight. As they exited the courthouse, Maria felt Javier's hand on her shoulder, grounding her amidst the chaos. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Yes, but we have to keep pushing," Maria replied, looking out at the sea of faces. "This victory belongs to everyone." In the days that followed, Maria and Javier continued their work, ensuring that the voices of those who had suffered were not forgotten. They organized community meetings, created platforms for open dialogue, and fostered a renewed sense of trust among the townspeople. The battle for justice had been won, but the fight for a better future was just beginning. As Maria stood in front of the community one evening, she felt a sense of purpose surge within her. "Together we can create a town where everyone feels safe, where we can stand united against injustice," she declared, her voice strong and unwavering. The crowd erupted in applause, the energy in the air electric with determination. They had faced darkness, and together they would forge a brighter path ahead. In that moment, Maria understood the true power of community, the ability to rise together, to transform pain into strength, and to shape a future free from fear. The fight for justice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over Willow Creek, the town felt different. There was a palpable energy in the air, a mixture of hope and apprehension. Maria stood at her kitchen window, staring out at the street where she had once felt afraid, now alive with the spirit of resilience. She could hear the distant sounds of laughter and chatter from the neighbors who had come together for a community meeting, but in her heart she felt the tension brewing. Despite the recent victory in court, the shadow of the men they had fought against loomed large. The head of the corrupt network, Victor Ruiz, was not one to take defeat lightly. He had been silent since the verdict, but Maria sensed that a storm was brewing. That evening, she decided to confront her fears head-on and joined the gathering at the community center. As she entered the packed room, the energy was electric. People filled every corner, and the atmosphere buzzed with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Maria stepped to the front, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice resonating through the room. "We've come a long way, but we need to prepare for what's next." The crowd murmured, some exchanging worried glances. "What do you mean?" someone shouted from the back. "I'm talking about the reality that we've stirred the pot," she replied, locking eyes with those in attendance. "Victor Ruiz is not finished with us. We need to stay vigilant." The room fell silent, and she could feel the weight of her words settling heavily in the air. As if on cue, a figure stepped into the room, cutting through the tension like a knife. It was Officer Harris, his expression serious. "I have an urgent update," he announced, capturing everyone's attention. "We've received credible threats against several members of this community. Victor's crew has been spotted in the area, and they're looking for retribution." Gasps filled the room and Maria's heart raced. She had feared this moment. "What do we do?" a woman cried out, her voice trembling. Officer Harris held up a hand, calming the crowd. "We need to stay united. We can't let fear dictate our actions. If we stand together, we'll be stronger than any threat." With a renewed sense of purpose, the meeting transformed from one of fear to a rallying cry for solidarity. They discussed safety measures, ways to strengthen their defenses, and how to keep the community informed. Maria felt a surge of adrenaline as ideas flowed, voices rising in unity. But as the meeting came to a close, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the calm before the storm. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with her fears. What if they came for her? What if they targeted Javier or anyone else who had spoken out? She needed to protect them. But how? The next day, Maria and Javier met at the local diner, their usual spot. The smell of coffee filled the air, grounding her amid the chaos. "I can't stop thinking about what Officer Harris said," she admitted, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her cup. "We need to prepare for the worst. Javier nodded, concern etched on his face. "You're right. Maybe we should organize a neighborhood watch or something. Strengthen numbers, you know?" "That's a good idea," Maria replied, her mind racing. "But we should also look into ways to document any suspicious activity. If we're going to protect ourselves, we need evidence." They spent the rest of the day drafting a plan to enhance their community's safety. They distributed flyers, encouraging neighbors to report any strange behavior. But beneath the surface, Maria felt the tension building, the fear of an impending showdown pressing down on her. Days turned into weeks, and the community watch began to take shape. They held regular meetings where they shared information and supported one another. Maria felt a sense of empowerment as neighbors who had once been afraid now stood tall, ready to confront their fears together. But still, in the back of her mind, the dread loomed. One evening, as Maria and Javier returned home after another successful meeting, they noticed something odd. The street was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the usual bustling sound of Willow Creek. As they approached her house, she spotted a figure lurking near her front porch. "Stay behind me," Javier whispered, instinctively positioning himself in front of her. Maria's heart raced as she reached for her phone, prepared to call for help. But as they got closer, the figure stepped into the light, revealing a familiar face. "Maria! Javier!" It was their neighbor, Mr. Thompson, his expression frantic. "You need to come with me. They're coming for you." "What are you talking about?" Maria's voice trembled, fear gnawing at her insides. "There's a group of men in a truck a few blocks away, and they're looking for you," he said urgently. "I overheard them talking. They're planning to make an example of you." Panic surged through Maria, but Javier gripped her arm firmly. "We need to go, now," he urged, his eyes darting around. With Mr. Thompson leading the way, they ducked into the alley behind her house, moving quickly but quietly. Maria's mind raced with thoughts of her community, of the people who had banded together in the face of fear. "What about the others?" she whispered, glancing back toward her home. "We'll warn them," Javier replied, determination shining in his eyes. "We can't let them take you." As they navigated through the alleyways, Maria could hear the distant rumble of a truck engine. Her heart pounded in her chest, each thud echoing the urgency of their escape. Finally, they reached a safe spot at Mr. Thompson's house, where the lights were dimmed and the curtains drawn tight. Once inside, they regrouped, adrenaline coursing through their veins. "What do we do now?" Maria gasped, trying to catch her breath. Mr. Thompson looked at them, his expression grave. "We need to alert the others. If they're targeting you, they might come for anyone who spoke out against Ruiz." "Let's gather everyone," Javier suggested. "We can't let fear win. We need to show them that we're not backing down." They quickly sent out messages to the community, urging everyone to meet at the community center. Maria felt a surge of adrenaline and dread as they prepared for what was to come. The showdown was inevitable, but she refused to let it define them. As they arrived at the center, a palpable tension filled the air. The room was packed with familiar faces, each person looking more resolute than the last. Maria stepped up to address the crowd, her voice trembling but determined. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We've been targeted and they want to silence us, but we're stronger together. We won't let them intimidate us." Cheers erupted, the energy in the room shifting to one of defiance. Maria felt a renewed sense of strength as they discussed their options. They brainstormed ways to ensure their safety and preserve their evidence. "Let's set up a watch tonight," one man suggested. "We need to be prepared for anything." The group began to formulate a plan, delegating responsibilities and mapping out positions. As the night wore on, Maria felt a sense of unity that transcended their individual fears. They were not alone in this fight. They had each other. As darkness enveloped the town, the air thickened with tension. Maria stood at the entrance of the community center, scanning the streets for any sign of trouble. Javier was by her side, his presence grounding her. Hours passed, and as the clock ticked closer to midnight, a vehicle pulled into view. A dark truck, the very same one they had been warned about. A cold shiver ran down Maria's spine as she turned to Javier. "This is it." The truck parked, and several figures emerged, their silhouettes menacing against the night. Maria's heart raced as she signaled to the group inside. They quickly took their positions, hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline. As the men approached, their intentions were clear. They wanted to intimidate, to instill fear, but they had underestimated the power of a united community. Maria stepped forward, fueled by the strength of her neighbors. "You're not welcome here," she shouted, her voice steady. One of the men laughed mockingly, stepping closer. "You think you can stand against us? You're just a bunch of scared little people." "No," Maria replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "We are strong, and we will not back down. We will fight for our town." In that moment, the atmosphere shifted. The community erupted in a chorus of voices, standing shoulder to shoulder, each person ready to defend their home. The men paused, their bravado faltering in the face of such unity. "What do you think you're going to do?" one of the men sneered, but the doubt in his voice betrayed his confidence. "We're going to stand together," Javier replied, stepping forward. "And if you want to mess with us, you'll have to answer to all of us." The standoff felt like an eternity, and for a moment, time stood still. The air was thick with anticipation, the community standing firm, their resolve unyielding. Realizing the power they were up against, the men exchanged uncertain glances. It was clear they had miscalculated. With a scowl, the leader of the group turned and barked, "This isn't over!" before retreating to their. In the days that followed the standoff, the air in Willow Creek felt different. What had once been filled with tension now buzzed with an invigorating sense of resilience. Maria walked through the streets, her heart swelling with pride as she noticed neighbors exchanging smiles and nods of solidarity. The community had found its voice, and it was stronger than ever. Yet amidst the newfound hope, shadows of doubt loomed. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that Victor Ruiz and his crew wouldn't back down easily. Late at night, she often found herself staring out the window, the darkness beyond mirroring her anxieties. How long could their unity hold? What would happen if the threat returned? One afternoon, as she sorted through her notes in her home office, she received an unexpected call from Officer Harris. "Maria, I think you should come down to the station. We need to discuss some recent developments." An icy shiver crept down her spine. "Is it about Ruiz?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. Please hurry." The drive to the station felt like an eternity. Every red light seemed to mock her urgency. When she arrived, she found Officer Harris waiting for her in a small conference room, his face drawn with concern. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I wanted to update you on our investigation. We've been tracking Ruiz and his associates, and we've uncovered something troubling." Maria leaned forward, her heart racing. "What is it?" "It seems Ruiz is planning to retaliate, and not just against you, but against the entire community. He's regrouping, and we believe he's targeting those who spoke out." Panic surged within her. "What can we do?" "We need to be proactive. I'm coordinating with local law enforcement and community leaders to increase patrols, but we also need your help. We want to set up a neighborhood watch, involving as many residents as possible." "Absolutely," she replied, determination settling in. "We can't let him intimidate us." As she left the station, Maria felt a sense of urgency. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the entire community she had fought for. That evening, she organized an emergency meeting at the community center. Neighbors filled the room, their expressions a mix of fear and defiance. "Ruiz is planning to retaliate," Maria announced, her voice steady. "But we can't let that stop us. We need to stand together and be prepared." The crowd murmured, anxiety rippling through them. But as she spoke about the importance of unity and vigilance, their fear transformed into resolve. They divided into teams, setting up communication systems and safety protocols. Maria felt a rush of hope as she witnessed her neighbors standing firm, their spirits ignited. Days passed, and the heightened sense of alertness became a part of their routine. Maria, alongside Javier and Mr. Thompson, patrolled the streets each night, armed with flashlights and walkie-talkies. The once familiar sound of crickets and rustling leaves now echoed with tension, but they embraced the challenge. Each time a car passed, every shadow cast on the sidewalk, they stood ready. Then one fateful evening, as they patrolled near the park, they noticed a group of men gathered by the old fountain, laughter mingling with the night air. But something felt off. The men's demeanor was aggressive, their postures tense. Maria's gut twisted with fear. "Stay back," she whispered, signaling to Javier and Mr. Thompson. They ducked behind a nearby tree, straining to hear the conversation. "Ruiz wants to send a message," one of the men growled. "We need to show them we're not afraid." Maria's heart raced. This was it, the confrontation they had all been bracing for. She glanced at her companions, their eyes wide with understanding. "We need to alert Officer Harris," she whispered urgently. As they hurriedly retreated to their cars, adrenaline surged through her veins. When they arrived at the station, they found Officer Harris already in the process of mobilizing a response team. "We were monitoring the area," he explained. "We've been waiting for a reason to act." Together they strategized, planning how to approach the situation without escalating it further. Maria felt a mixture of fear and determination. This was her moment to stand firm, not just for herself, but for her entire community. They returned to the park, the shadows deepening around them. As they approached the fountain again, they could see the men more clearly now, their faces illuminated by the streetlights. "You think you can hide behind your little community?" one of them sneered, catching sight of Maria and her companions. "Leave now," Maria commanded, her voice surprisingly steady. "You're not welcome here." Laughter erupted from the group, but it was devoid of humor. "You think you can scare us? You're nothing." Before Maria could respond, Officer Harris and his team arrived, surrounding the men. "You're trespassing and causing trouble," he declared, authority resonating in his voice. "It's time to leave." The atmosphere crackled with tension as the men hesitated, caught off guard. In that moment, Maria felt a wave of strength. They had not come here to back down. With the community behind her, she stood tall, embodying the courage that had united them. As the men exchanged worried glances, the leader spat on the ground in front of them. "This isn't over. You'll regret crossing us." He turned, leading his crew away, defeated for now. With the threat temporarily dispersed, relief flooded through Maria. They had stood their ground, and the community's strength had prevailed. But deep down, she knew this was only a chapter in their ongoing battle. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in Willow Creek began to shift. The town was buzzing with stories of their courage, and even those who had been hesitant to engage found strength in the collective spirit. Maria was approached by several neighbors, all eager to help, and the bonds they formed were unbreakable. But as Maria reflected on their victories, she also understood the work that lay ahead. While they had won this battle, the war against corruption and fear was far from over. It would take continuous effort, vigilance, and unwavering unity. One evening, as she walked home from the community center, Maria felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. The night sky was clear, stars twinkling like distant promises. She stopped to take a breath, grounding herself in the present moment. Each step forward was a testament to the strength she had found within herself and the community around her. As she reached her front porch, Maria knew she had sparked a change, not just for herself, but for Willow Creek. Their fight for justice had ignited a fire within each person, reminding them that together they could face any challenge that came their way. And as long as they stood united, their hope for a brighter future would continue to shine, guiding them through the darkness. As the dust settles on this intense journey, Maria Garcia and the community of Willow Creek remind us that courage and unity can overcome even the darkest challenges. Their fight for justice continues, echoing the power of standing together against adversity. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful narratives that ignite hope and resilience. Join us as we explore more incredible journeys and life lessons. Thank you for watching and stay strong.